Michael was just an ordinary Uber driver, struggling, forgotten, invisible to most people who passed through his car. He had lost everything 10 years ago: his career, his home, his love. But on one fateful night at 2:30 a.m., Michael's life would end. Or so everyone believed. What happens next will shatter everything he thought he knew about death, love, and second chances. Because Michael didn't just come back to life. He came back to discover a truth so shocking that it would force him to question whether his resurrection was a blessing or the cruelest punishment of all.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. Michael had been driving Uber for 5 years, and those 5 years felt like 50. The steering wheel had become an extension of his tired hands, the backseat camera his only witness to the hundreds of thousands of miles and thousands of passengers who came and went from his life like ghosts. He existed in a perpetual state of exhaustion, the kind that sinks into your bones and makes you forget what it feels like to want anything beyond the next paycheck. 5 years. That's how long it had been since his entire life collapsed. 5 years since the financial firm where he'd worked for 12 years shut down overnight, leaving him with severance that wouldn't even cover 6 months of rent. 5 years since he'd signed the lease on his first car, a used Honda Accord that cost him nearly everything he had left. 5 years of driving through nights and days, through rain and snow, through the complicated geography of a city that had once been his playground and was now just another landscape he had to navigate for survival. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in October. The city was transitioning from the evening crowd to the late-night drifters, business travelers rushing to catch connections, insomniacs seeking escape, partygoers stumbling from one bar to another, and people like Michael who had nowhere else to be at this hour. His Uber app pinged, a pickup request at the airport terminal. The passenger's name was Anna. Her rating was 4.8 stars. Michael accepted without thinking about it. He had learned long ago not to think about much of anything anymore. Thinking led to reflection. Reflection led to regret. And regret, he discovered, was the most corrosive emotion available to the human heart. The drive to the airport took 35 minutes. Michael's 2014 Honda Accord had seen better days. The check engine light had been on for 3 months, and he'd learned to ignore it the same way he'd learned to ignore most things. The car smelled like old coffee and the faint, almost medicinal scent of air freshener that cost 99 cents at the supermarket. The seats had a few stains on them. Coffee, he hoped, though he couldn't be certain. The floor mats were worn through in places, revealing the metal underneath. Michael kept it clean, though, not out of pride, but out of respect for the machine that kept him alive. It was the one thing in his life that was purely functional and honest. The car didn't judge him. It didn't ask him why he'd failed. It just ran. And in return, Michael maintained it the best he could. He thought about Sarah while he drove. He always thought about Sarah, during the late-night shifts. The graveyard hours had a way of dragging up old memories, the kind you tried to bury during daylight. Sarah had been his girlfriend 10 years ago, back when Michael still had dreams and a 401k and an office on the 32nd floor of a blast tower downtown. She had been brilliant and beautiful, in a way that made him feel like he was the luckiest man on earth. She was a software engineer, quick-witted and ambitious, with long brunette hair that she wore pulled back professionally and green-blue eyes that seemed to see through facades and pretense. She had this way of laughing that made everyone around her want to make her laugh again. They had met at a tech conference. Michael had been there representing his firm, feeling important and accomplished. Sarah had been pitching an algorithm she had developed, and Michael had been captivated, not just by her intelligence, but by the way she spoke about her work with such passion and conviction. He'd asked her to dinner, expecting her to say no. She'd said yes. That dinner had become 5 years of dinners, of weekends away, of building a future together in their minds. But then the financial collapse came. His company tanked. The market crashed. His severance package wasn't enough.
His savings disappeared faster than he thought possible. Within 3 months, he'd lost the apartment they shared. Within 6 months, he'd lost his dignity. And Sarah? Well, Sarah made a choice. He could still remember the exact words, "I can't follow you down, Michael. I just can't." She hadn't been cruel about it. That was almost worse. She'd said it gently, standing in the kitchen of the apartment they'd shared, as if ending a 10-year relationship could be softened by tone of voice. He'd tried to argue with her, to convince her that this was temporary, that they would get through it together. But Sarah had already made up her mind. The fear in her eyes was too strong. The self-preservation instinct had already taken over. 3 weeks later, she was gone. She'd packed her belongings while Michael was at an interview that hadn't led anywhere. She left a note on the kitchen counter. A note, not a letter. Just a short explanation that she hoped he understood, that she was sorry, that she needed to think of herself for once. Michael stared at that note for hours, unable to comprehend that a decade of love could be summarized in 3 short paragraphs. 6 months after that, Michael was living in his car, which had been parked behind a 24-hour gym where he paid $49 a month for a membership so he could shower and use the bathroom. He'd work out just to appear like he belonged there. He'd change his clothes in the locker room and pretend that this wasn't his life. Every morning he'd wake up to the sound of other people's lives happening around him, and he'd think about Sarah. He'd imagine her in her new apartment, probably with someone new, someone who had money and prospects and a future. He'd imagine her forgetting about him, and that thought was somehow worse than the poverty itself. Now, 5 years later, he still thought about her every night. On these late shifts, when the world was quiet and he was alone with his thoughts and the hum of the engine, he allowed himself to remember. He allowed himself to wonder what she was doing, where she was living, if she ever thought about him. It was a masochistic ritual, but it was all he had left of that life. These midnight contemplations about a woman who had chosen to save herself instead of drowning with him. The airport terminal sprawled before him like a sleeping beast. Michael navigated the pickup lanes with practiced precision. He'd driven to the airport so many times that he could probably do it in his sleep. Terminal C, North Side, passenger pickup zone. He texted Anna that he was here and began the standard Uber driver wait, finding a safe spot, turning on the hazard lights, watching the crowd of travelers emerge from the sliding doors. She appeared 3 minutes later, dragging an oversized suitcase behind her like she was pulling a small child. She looked exhausted, the kind of exhausted that comes from traveling, from being stuck in airports and airplanes and the liminal spaces between one life and another. She looked like she'd been crying. Michael noticed these things about passengers, the small details that most people overlooked, the slightly swollen eyes, the way she was moving just a bit slower than necessary, as if every step required more energy than she had to give. Michael got out to help her with her bag. This was something he always did, even though most people didn't expect it. It was one of the small ways he maintained his dignity, by treating people like they mattered. It was his way of saying, I may have nothing, but I still have respect. I may have failed at everything else, but I can still be kind. Anna was somewhere in her 50s, Michael guessed. Her hair was gray, cut to shoulder length, and had the texture of someone who hadn't had it professionally done in a long time. Her eyes were a faded blue, and they held the particular sadness of someone who had experienced multiple betrayals. When she saw him getting out to help, something shifted in her expression. Relief, maybe, or recognition that at least one person in the universe was still capable of being kind. Thank you, she said, and her voice cracked slightly as if she'd been crying recently or was on the verge of it. My Uber driver was supposed to pick me up 2 hours ago. He just never showed up. I've been sitting inside the terminal for the last 2 hours, watching people come and go, trying to figure out if the world had just decided that today was the day I would be completely alone. And then I called Uber again and you arrived. Michael took her suitcase and placed it carefully in the trunk. He was always careful with people's belongings. He understood that every object people carried held meaning, memory, significance. Where are we headed? He asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be anywhere glamorous. Downtown, the Riverside Apartments on 5th and Main, she said quietly. Michael knew the place. It was a retirement community, the kind of building where people went to when they had decided that their lives were essentially over, just waiting for the formal paperwork to catch up with reality. He didn't say this, of course. Instead, he settled into the driver's seat and pulled back into traffic with gentle care, leaving the airport chaos behind. As he drove, Anna talked. She told me about her daughter, who lived in California and hadn't called her in 3 months. She told me about her late husband, who had been a teacher and a kind man, and who had died 5 years ago. She told me about the apartment she was moving into and how she was terrified of being alone in it. She told me about the life she'd built, the choices she'd made, and the regrets that kept her up at night. Michael listened, which was what most people actually wanted. Not advice, not judgment, not solutions. Just to be heard. Just to have their existence acknowledged by another living human being. The drive took 40 minutes. Michael took slightly longer route, not to increase the fare, he wasn't that kind of driver, but because he sensed that Anna needed the company, the simple presence of another human being. The highway unfolded before them under the orange glow of sodium vapor lights. The city's nighttime landscape spread out like a circuit board. Thousands of points of light representing thousands of lives all happening simultaneously, all just trying to get through the night. "You know what's funny?" Anna said at one point, breaking a comfortable silence. "I've been thinking about my life a lot lately, but all the choices I made, all the chances I didn't take, and I keep thinking about this one moment. There was a man."
You know what's funny? Anna said at one point, breaking a comfortable silence. "I've been thinking about my life a lot lately. About all the choices I made, all the chances I didn't take. And I keep thinking about this one moment. There was a man I knew, a long time ago. He was kind, like you. He was always kind, even when everything was falling apart. I didn't appreciate it at the time. I was young and I was scared and I thought kindness was weakness. But now I understand that kindness is the bravest thing a person can do. And this man, I don't know where he is now. He's probably gone, probably living a life I couldn't be part of anymore. And I regret it every single day." Michael didn't respond immediately. He was driving on autopilot now, thinking about the strange symmetry of life, the way people carried regrets like stones in their pockets, weighing them down, slowing them down, preventing them from ever really moving forward. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and careful. "Maybe it's not too late," Michael said. "Maybe second chances exist. Maybe the universe gives us opportunities to reconnect, to fix what broke, to find our way back to the people who matter." Anna looked at him with an odd intensity, as if something in his words had reached through the darkness of her own despair and touched something vital. "Do you really believe that?" she asked. "I don't know," Michael said honestly. "But I think I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? If we can't believe in second chances, if we can't believe that the universe might offer us redemption or reconnection, or at least the opportunity to understand what we've lost, then what's the point of continuing? I think second chances have to exist, because without them, we're all just slowly dying until we actually die." They arrived at the Riverside Apartments at 1:22 a.m. The building was nondescript, a 7-story structure that probably had been built in the 1980s and had been slowly aging ever since. It represented a certain kind of surrender. Not unhappy, necessarily, but resigned. A place where people went to live out the final chapters of their stories. Michael helped Anna with her suitcase, carrying it all the way to the elevator and pressing the button for the 4th floor. She pressed a $100 bill into his hand and told him he was a good person. Michael wanted to tell her that he wasn't, that good people don't lose everything, that good people are prepared for catastrophe, that good people make choices that don't destroy the lives of everyone around them. But he just smiled and thanked her. He wanted to tell her more. He wanted to tell her that he understood her regret, that he carried his own regrets like a physical weight, that he thought about the man she was talking about every single night. But he said nothing. He just took the $100 bill and watched her disappear into the building. And he thought, at least I can make one person feel a little less alone tonight. He drove away from the Riverside Apartments, back into the city. The highways at 1:30 a.m. had a particular quality. They were simultaneously empty and crowded, filled with other people driving toward other destinations,
All of them alone in their cars, all of them carrying their own burdens and regrets and late-night thoughts. His shift was supposed to end at 2 a.m. He could have just gone home, back to the small studio apartment he'd managed to afford after 5 years of Uber driving. It was a modest place. One room, a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in, and a kitchen that consisted of a hot plate and a mini fridge. But it was his. It was an upgrade from the car, at least. But Michael had accepted one more ride request while dropping off Anna. Another airport pickup. Another person who needed to get somewhere. Another stranger who would briefly enter his life and then disappear forever. He was heading back toward the airport, driving through the industrial district that surrounded it. Warehouses and truck stops, and the kind of businesses that only operated during the night hours. It was 2:28 a.m. The traffic light at the intersection of Harbor Drive and Industrial Way was red. Michael was stopped, waiting, thinking about Anna and her regrets and the possibility of second chances. He was thinking about Sarah. He was thinking about how life had a way of condensing into moments, into single decisions that echoed forward through time and shaped everything that came after. The red sedan appeared without warning. It ran the red light at full speed. Easily 60 miles an hour, maybe faster. Michael saw it in the split second before the impact, saw the flash of headlights, saw the moment when avoidance became impossible. He had time for exactly one thought. Sarah. The impact came with a sound like the world breaking. Metal screamed against metal. Glass exploded. Michael felt the force of the collision move through his body, felt his bones bend in ways they weren't designed to bend, felt something rupture inside him. He felt pain, sharp, white-hot pain that seemed to encompass his entire body, as if every nerve ending was on fire. He heard the sound of his car crumpling like paper. He smelled burning rubber and gasoline and something metallic that he realized was his own blood. He tried to breathe. His lungs wouldn't cooperate. The world was spinning, the pain was everywhere and nowhere, abstract and overwhelming. He felt the strange sensation of his consciousness fragmenting, of his awareness beginning to scatter like light through a prism. In his final seconds of consciousness, Michael thought about Anna. He thought about her regrets, her longing for a second chance, her wish that somehow she could reconnect with the man she had loved. He thought about Sarah, and about the apartment they'd shared, and about the life that seemed so certain before everything fell apart. And then, he heard nothing else.
Michael's eyes opened to the sound of an announcement. Final call for boarding, United Airlines Flight 447, departing from gate C12. He was lying on the floor of the airport terminal, the same terminal where he'd picked up Anna, the same terminal where he'd waited countless times for passengers to emerge with their luggage and their tired faces and their unspoken stories. The lights were fluorescent and too bright, the kind of lighting that seemed to drain color and life from everything it touched. People were walking around him, over him, past him, a river of humanity that seemed completely unaware of his existence on the floor. Michael tried to sit up, and his body obeyed, which seemed like a miracle and a curse at all once. His muscles responded. His mind was clear. There was no pain. This was strange in itself. After the impact, he'd expected to wake up to pain or not to wake up at all. But here he was, sitting up on the floor of an airport terminal, feeling nothing but a profound disorientation. His phone was in his pocket. He pulled it out with shaking hands. 2:47 a.m., the same time it had been when he'd picked up Anna. He checked his Uber app, scrolling through his recent rides, and there was nothing there. No pickup request from Anna, no completed ride, no payment from Anna's trip, no indication that the last few hours had happened at all. It was as if the entire evening had been erased. Michael pulled himself to his feet, using a nearby bench for support. His legs were steady. His head was clear. But something was fundamentally wrong. He could feel it, a wrongness that penetrated deeper than physical sensation, a wrongness that existed at the level of reality itself. People were staring at him now. Or were they? He looked around, trying to make eye contact with someone, anyone. But their eyes seemed to slide past him like he was transparent. A woman walked within inches of him without appearing to see him. A man bumped into him but didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge the contact. It was as if Michael had become invisible. Michael walked toward the nearest bathroom. He needed to see himself, needed to confirm that he was still here, still solid, still real. The bathroom was empty, a stroke of luck or the universe's continued violation of the normal rules. He approached the sink and looked in the mirror. His face was exactly as it had always been. Tired, ordinary, forgettable. No visible injuries, no blood, nothing to suggest that anything had happened at all. His gray work shirt was clean, his dark jeans were unblemished, his hands didn't show any signs of trauma. He looked exactly like he always looked, like a man who had lost everything and was slowly disappearing out of the world. He washed his hands and his face, the cold water shocking him slightly. He could feel it. The water was real. His skin was real. His reflection was real. But nothing else seemed to be. He walked back to the main terminal area and stood in front of a television monitor. A news alert was scrolling across the bottom. Breaking news. Fatal automobile accident reported in industrial district near airport. Single vehicle involved. Uber driver deceased on scene. Investigation ongoing. Michael's hand moved to his chest. He could feel his heartbeat. Normal, steady. The heartbeat of a man who should have been dead. He tried to leave the terminal, but something stopped him. An older man in a security uniform walked right through him, literally through him, as if Michael's body was nothing more than air and memory. For a moment, the world seemed to bend. Michael felt a sensation like falling, like existing and not existing simultaneously. Then the moment passed, and the guard was on the other side of him, completely unaware of what had happened. Michael looked down at his hands, expecting to see them fade away, but they were solid. They were real. He could touch them. He could feel the sensation of skin against skin, but he couldn't affect anything. He'd tried to touch a newspaper kiosk, and his hands passed through it like it was vapor. This couldn't be happening. This was a dream. It had to be a dream. But it wasn't. Michael spent the next 3 hours wandering the airport terminal, watching the world move around him in slow motion. He tried to talk to people, but they didn't hear him. Their ears seemed to filter out his voice as if he wasn't generating any sound at all. He tried to order coffee at one of the kiosks, and the barista's eyes went blank when he spoke, as if his words were being transmitted in a frequency that humans couldn't process. The barista looked right through him and took an order from the person behind him, a woman who had been invisible to Michael just a moment before. He tried to pick up a newspaper, and his hands passed through it. He tried to sit in a chair, and he fell through it, catching himself just before complete panic set in. The world had become a place where he existed, but didn't exist, where he could see and hear everything but couldn't interact with anything. By 5:30 a.m., Michael had only one coherent thought. He needed to find Sarah. He didn't know why. It didn't make any logical sense, but something was pulling him toward her, some gravity of need that he couldn't explain or resist, something deeper than logic, some connection that transcended normal understanding. He knew where she worked, or at least he thought he knew where she worked 10 years ago. The Meridian Building downtown, 45 stories of glass and steel where the successful people of the city conducted their successful lives. It was a place Michael hadn't been to since the day she let him go. A place he'd driven past many times over the years, always late at night, always finding himself on streets that led past that building, as if some part of him was compelled to know where she was, even if he couldn't have her. He found a taxi outside the airport terminal and got in. The driver didn't acknowledge him. Michael gave the address anyway, speaking as clearly as possible. The taxi didn't move. Michael tried opening the door. His hand passed through it. He closed his eyes and focused entirely on the idea of the car moving, on visualizing himself at the Meridian Building. It was an absurd thought. You couldn't will reality into compliance through visualization. And yet, somehow, the taxi began to move. The world shifted around him. The airport receded. The highways unfolded before them like a dream. The city lights multiplied, and gradually, inexorably, Michael found himself being transported to the place he needed to be. The Meridian Building was even more impressive than Michael remembered. It dominated the skyline, a monument to money and power, and the kind of success that was measured in quarterly earnings and shareholder value. It was the kind of building that made you feel small, insignificant, a building designed to remind you of the vast distance between the people inside it and everyone else. Michael hated coming here 10 years ago. He hated the way the security guard would look at him with barely concealed disdain. He hated the way the elevator would slowly carry him upward towards Sarah's office, increasing the distance between him and the normal world with every floor. He walked through the lobby at 6:15 a.m. The security guard didn't stop him, probably couldn't see him. Michael rode the elevator up without pressing any buttons, as if the building itself knew where he needed to go. The walls of the elevator were mirrored, and Michael saw his reflection in them. He looked like a ghost already, pale, translucent, a man who was slowly fading out of the world. Sarah's office was on the 45th floor. Michael knew this somehow, the way you know things in dreams, through some mechanism of intuition that bypassed normal logic. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped out into a hallway that smelled like money and air conditioning and the particular cleanliness of obsessive maintenance. Her office was at the end of the corridor, a set of double doors with her name printed on a brass nameplate. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city spreading out beneath the sky like a kingdom conquered and divided into plots. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the city in shades of orange and pink.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But it was unmistakably her. It was the face he had loved. It was the face he had carried with him through 5 years of driving a broken-down Uber through the night, through 5 years of knowing that he would never have the life that would have allowed him to keep her. It was the face he had seen in his dreams, in his late-night contemplations, in the moments just before sleep when his mind was free to roam through the landscape of his regrets. She was heading toward the elevator. She was going to the gym, which was located in the basement. Michael understood this from some mechanism of intuition. He knew her routines, he realized, because she had never really left his mind, and because he had, at some point over the years, figured out her schedule from the few social media posts she made. Michael followed her. When she was alone in the stairwell leading to the basement gym, he appeared before her. For a moment, Sarah didn't see him. She started to walk past, and then something made her stop. Her hand went to her chest. She turned around slowly, as if she was afraid of what she would find, but was compelled to look anyway. When her eyes met his, tears immediately formed, as if some part of her had been waiting 10 years for this moment, as if some deep part of her consciousness had always known this was coming. "Michael?" Her voice was barely a whisper. He didn't know how to answer. He wasn't even sure he was real enough to answer, but he opened his mouth, and sound came out. "Sarah." She pulled him into the stairwell, away from the windows and cameras. Her hands moved over his face as if she needed to confirm that he was solid, that he was really there. When she kissed him, Michael felt the world shift. It was a kiss that contained 10 years of longing, 10 years of what-ifs, 10 years of a love that had never actually died, just been put into hibernation. "How is this possible?" Sarah said. "I saw the news this morning. An Uber driver, accident near the airport. The description, it was you. It had to be you. But you're here. You're solid. I can feel you." "I can't explain it," Michael said. "But I died, Sarah. I was hit by a car this morning around 2:30 a.m. I felt myself dying. And then I woke up in the terminal and I was invisible. People couldn't see me. They couldn't hear me. I couldn't touch anything. But you, somehow you can see me. You're the only one who can see me."
Sarah gripped his hand tightly, as if afraid he would disappear if she let go. "That's impossible," she said. "But I'm not questioning it. I'm not questioning anything. You're here. That's all that matters." They went to Sarah's office on the 45th floor. She called in sick to work, told her assistant to cancel her meetings and to hold all calls. The office was a monument to her success, high-end furniture that looked like it had been chosen by someone who understood that success required a certain aesthetic. Original artwork on the walls, a view that seemed to encompass the entire world, the city spreading out beneath them like something she had conquered and claimed as her own. Michael looked at it and felt a complex cocktail of emotions swirling in his chest. Proud of what she had accomplished, sad about what they both had lost, confused about what was happening, terrified that he would disappear again, that this moment of reunion would be temporary, that he would blink and find himself back in that state of invisible desolation. Sarah told him everything. She told him about the night she left him, about how she had written him a letter and driven to his apartment at 3 a.m. desperate to take back what she'd said. She told him about the guilt that had consumed her, about how she had tried to rationalize leaving him, about how she had told herself that she was just being practical, just being smart, just being realistic about what she could and couldn't handle. She told him about sitting on his doorstep for 2 hours, crying, the letter clutched in her hands, and then deciding she was too much of a coward to give it to him. She told him about getting back in her car and driving away, and about how that decision, that small moment of cowardice, had haunted every single day of her life for the next 10 years. She told him about the necklace she had been wearing, her grandmother's pendant, an antique piece of jewelry that had been passed down through 4 generations of women in her family. She told him about how her grandmother had told her that wishes made on the pendant, wishes made with true intention and true love, had power. Not supernatural power necessarily, but the kind of power that comes from absolute commitment, from the alignment of intention and desire. She told him about sitting on his doorstep and making a wish. She told him about wishing for a second chance, wishing that somehow the universe would give them both another opportunity to get it right, wishing that he would come back to her, wishing that she would have the opportunity to apologize, to explain, to try again. I've worn that pendant every day for 10 years, Michael. Every single day. I've touched it whenever I thought about you. I made the same wish over and over again, and I never stopped believing that somehow, someday, the universe would answer that wish. Michael listened, and with each word, something inside him began to unravel. He had spent 10 years thinking that Sarah had abandoned him, that she had been too weak to stand by him when things got difficult. But the truth was more complicated than that. The truth was that she had loved him. The truth was that she had suffered too. The truth was that she had carried her own version of his regret, her own version of his pain. "I think I understand what happened," Michael said slowly. "I think you need to know something, Sarah. Something that will explain all of this." Sarah looked at him with eyes full of fear and hope and desperate need. "Tell me," she whispered. "Tell me everything." Michael took a deep breath. He didn't know how to explain it. He didn't know how to tell her that he thought her wish, made 10 years ago on a doorstep with tears on her face, had somehow reached across the span of a decade and pulled him back from death. It sounded insane, but no more insane than anything else that happened in the last few hours. No more insane than the fact that he was standing here at all, that he was alive but not alive, that he existed in a space between worlds, between death and life, between the past and the future. "I think your wish worked," Michael said slowly. "I think your intention, your love, your absolute refusal to accept that we were truly separated, I think that pulled me back. Not from life, but from death. I died this morning, Sarah. I know that sounds impossible, but I felt it. I experienced it. And then something brought me back, something that knew who I needed to see, something that understood that the one thing that could keep me tethered to this world, the one thing that could make me real, was you.
Detective James Rivera had been investigating impossible cases for 23 years, and he learned that the impossible usually had a very logical explanation. You just had to dig deep enough, ask the right questions, and refuse to accept the convenient narrative that everyone wanted you to believe. A dead man walking around the city was no exception to this rule. The accident report was clear. A 2014 Honda Accord had been struck by a 2019 Cadillac at the intersection of Harbor Drive and Industrial Way at 2:30 a.m. on October 17th. The Uber driver, one Michael Chen, age 38, had been pronounced dead at the scene by paramedics at 2:47 a.m. The Cadillac driver, Daniel Russo, had failed a sobriety test and was now in custody awaiting arraignment. Case closed. Except for one problem. Michael Chen had been spotted at Meridian Technologies at 7:30 a.m. on October 17th, walking out of an elevator with Sarah Morrison, the company's CEO, in plain sight of multiple employees. Multiple security cameras captured the footage. Multiple people had seen him. And Michael Chen was definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, absolutely not dead. This discrepancy was why Detective James Rivera now found himself riding the elevator to the 45th floor of the Meridian building on a Wednesday morning, holding a warrant that probably wouldn't be necessary and questions that he definitely didn't have answers for. He was a man in his mid-40s, salt-and-pepper dark hair with gray at the temples, sharp, observant brown eyes that had seen too much truth and not enough justice. He had developed a particular way of looking at the world, skeptical, analytical, patient in a way that came from years of interrogations where the truth eventually emerged if you were willing to wait long enough. Sarah answered the door to her office, looking composed in a way that seemed almost rehearsed. She was a beautiful woman in her mid-30s, the kind of woman who had clearly built a successful life through intelligence and determination. Detective Rivera had done his homework before arriving. Sarah Morrison had started Meridian Technologies 8 years ago with a revolutionary algorithm for financial prediction. The company was now worth an estimated $50 million. She was recently divorced from a tech entrepreneur named David Park. She was childless, living in a penthouse apartment downtown, and her childhood had been stable. Loving parents, good education, the kind of foundation that usually produced well-adjusted, successful people, not murderers or conspirators. But Rivera had learned that you never really knew what someone was capable of until you looked beneath the surface. Sarah Morrison? Rivera showed his badge, the movement practiced and efficient. I need to ask you some questions about Michael Chen. Michael was sitting on Sarah's couch, looking out the window at the city below. When he saw the detective, he stood and walked toward him with a strange serenity, the kind of serenity that innocent people rarely possessed and guilty people couldn't fake. I'm Michael Chen. I know what this looks like. What it looks like, Detective Rivera said, studying him carefully, is that you're supposed to be dead. Medical examiner pronounced you dead. Paramedics saw you dead. Now you're very obviously not dead, which raises some uncomfortable questions. The first one being why? Michael and Sarah exchanged a look. Some unspoken communication passed between them, a negotiation about how much to reveal and what could possibly be explained without sounding completely insane. I don't expect you to believe this, Michael said, but I died this morning. Around 2:30 a.m. A car hit me at the intersection of Harbor Drive and Industrial Way. I felt myself dying. I experienced death, and then I woke up at the airport. You woke up, Rivera repeated, keeping his voice neutral and his expression carefully blank. He'd heard a lot of stories in his career. People always had stories, explanations, justifications for why they'd done what they'd done. But this was a new one. You woke up at the airport. That's about 3 miles from where you were hit. I know it sounds insane, Sarah interjected. She was standing close to Michael, her hand finding his, the gesture protective and possessive at the same time. "But it's the truth. I have no explanation for how it's possible, but—" "Let me stop you right there," Rivera said. He pulled out his worn brown leather notebook, the pages dog-eared and filled with years of notes and observations. "I've been a detective for 23 years, and I had learned that when someone tells me they don't have an explanation, what they usually mean is not the explanation they have is illegal. So let me ask you this. Did you, at any point, falsify the accident report? Did you, at any point, bribe the paramedics or the medical examiner? Is there any scenario in which Michael Chen didn't actually die and you two have just been covering it up?" "No," Michael said, and his voice had a strange confidence to it, the kind of confidence that someone who had moved beyond fear into a space of acceptance. "I died. I'm certain of that. I felt my life leave my body. I experienced the sensation of consciousness fragmenting, of awareness dispersing, and then I came back. I woke up at the airport terminal. I couldn't affect anything or anyone. I was invisible. And then I found Sarah, and suddenly I was visible again." Rivera looked at Michael for a long moment, studying his face for signs of deception. There were none. But there was something else, something almost resigned, as if Michael was speaking about something he had already accepted and made peace with. Something that suggested he wasn't trying to hide anything, wasn't trying to construct an elaborate lie. He was simply telling the truth as he understood it, no matter how impossible it sounded. "I need you both to come downtown. We're going to figure out what happened here, one way or another." At the police station, he had them put in separate interview rooms. This was a standard tactic. Separate the two subjects, let them contradict each other, find the seams where the story unravels. Lies always had inconsistencies. People couldn't keep track of all the details. They would say something in room A that contradicted something they had said in room B, and that's where the truth emerged. Not from what they said, but from what they revealed through their contradictions. But as he questioned Michael and then Sarah, something strange happened. They told the exact same story, every detail perfectly consistent. There was no variation, no deviation, no sign of coordination or conspiracy. They answered every question identically. They described the same timeline, the same events, the same impossible experience. It was too perfect, which meant that either they were the most accomplished liars Rivera had ever encountered in 23 years of detective work, or they were actually telling the truth. And Rivera had learned to recognize the particular quality of truth. It had a weight to it, a solidity that lies lacked. Lies were slippery things. Truth just sat there, unmoved and unmoving. Rivera sat in his office with the case file open before him. The medical examiner's report was clear, deceased on scene. The paramedic report was detailed and professional. The accident scene photographs showed conclusive evidence of a collision. But something was wrong. Everything was too neat. Everything was too perfect. Everything had the texture of a story that had been carefully constructed rather than a genuine documentation of events. Rivera made a call to the ME's office. He asked to speak with Dr. Patricia Huang, the medical examiner who had supposedly examined Michael Chen. "I have no record of examining Michael Chen," Dr. Huang said, and her voice sounded genuinely confused. "Are you sure you have the right case number?" Rivera checked. He had the right case number. He had the right scene. He had the right accident. But there was no body. There was no examination. There was no death certificate because technically there was no official death. This was impossible. Rivera had seen the paramedic notes. He had read their statement. They had pronounced Michael Chen dead at the scene. But when he pulled the original paramedic report, something was wrong. The report was dated, and it appeared official, but it had no paramedic signature. The report was filed, but it had never been approved by a supervisor. It had been inserted into the system like a ghost, present but insubstantial. It was as if someone had fabricated an entire death report out of whole cloth. But why would anyone do that? And more importantly, who? Rivera decided to visit the accident scene himself. He drove to the intersection of Harbor Drive and Industrial Way on a Wednesday morning, the same day but different hours, trying to understand what had happened in this place. Early morning at this location was different from 2:30 a.m. The light was different, the energy was different, but the evidence remained. There were skid marks on the pavement, dark lines showing the moment when Michael's car had tried to stop and failed. There was a shattered taillight scattered across the asphalt, red plastic fragments glinting in the morning light. There was damage to the pavement, scoring marks where metal had scraped concrete. And there was the Cadillac, still impounded with obvious damage to the front fender, the kind of damage that only came from hitting another vehicle at high speed. Everything suggested that a collision had occurred exactly as reported. But there was no wreckage from Michael's Uber, no vehicle matching a 2014 Honda Accord anywhere on the scene, no corresponding damage to any vehicle that matched what the medical examiner's absence and the paramedics' missing signatures suggested. Rivera sat in his car and thought about this. He thought about the facts. Michael Chen was alive. Michael Chen had been hit by a car. Michael Chen was standing in Sarah Morrison's office at the exact time he was supposed to be dead. And Michael Chen had no explanation for any of it, only a story about waking up in an airport terminal and an impossible resurrection. Then it hit him. Rivera's hands began to shake as the implications became clear. He called the hospital where the paramedics were based and asked them to pull the roster for the night of October 17th. He waited while the records person searched through files and databases. "We have a problem," the records person said after several minutes. "There's no paramedic record for anyone responding to an accident at Harbor Drive and Industrial Way on October 17th. No call logged, no dispatch record, nothing." "That's impossible," Rivera said. "I have the paramedic report right here." "Then someone forged it," the records person said simply. Rivera hung up and sat in his car, thinking. If the accident was real, if the collision had genuinely happened, if Michael was actually hit by a car, then why would there be no paramedics? Why would there be no body? Why would there be a forged death report? Unless Michael Chen wasn't supposed to survive. Unless someone had arranged for him not to survive. Unless the accident report and the fake paramedic signatures were part of a cover-up. But a cover-up for what? Unless Sarah had arranged it. Unless Sarah had wanted Michael dead and had used Daniel Russo as the instrument of that death. Rivera made another call. He requested the complete records for the accident from the police department's evidence locker. While he waited, he thought about Sarah Morrison. Sarah Morrison, who was worth $50 million. Sarah Morrison, who had recently divorced her husband. Sarah Morrison, whose net worth had suddenly increased by 30% in the 3 months following her divorce. What if the divorce had been arranged? What if the settlement had been larger than expected? What if Sarah had orchestrated all of it? What if she had been planning something elaborate and this impossible resurrection of Michael Chen was part of that plan? The evidence arrived an hour later. Rivera spread the photographs out on his desk. The collision site, the damage to the Cadillac, the skid marks, and in one of the photographs, taken from a distance, what appeared to be a vehicle being towed away from the scene, Michael's Uber. But there was something odd about the photograph. The vehicle looked damaged, yes, but not as damaged as it should have been. Not damaged in the way that would result in a death. But something was missing. Something was removed. Rivera called Detective Lisa Chen, no relation to Michael, who worked in the evidence division. Lisa was meticulous, careful, the kind of investigator who noticed when things didn't match. "Lisa, I need you to run a special trace on a vehicle towing report from October 17th, a 2014 Honda Accord registered to Michael Chen, supposedly at Harrison Salvage Yard." Lisa called back 20 minutes later. She said, "That vehicle never made it to Harrison. According to the dispatch records, the tow truck picked up the vehicle at the accident scene at 3:15 a.m., but the driver reported a mechanical failure and took it to a private mechanic instead. A shop called Russo's Auto Repair." Russo. Daniel Russo, the man who had hit Michael's car with his Cadillac, the drunk driver who was now in custody awaiting trial. The man Rivera had assumed was simply the unfortunate driver of the vehicle that had struck Michael's car. But what if it wasn't an accident? What if it was deliberate? What if there was a connection between the person who'd hit Michael and the person, Sarah, who had every reason to want him dead? Rivera went back to the interview room where Michael was being held. Michael looked up at him with an expression that seemed to contain infinite sadness. He knew. Somehow, Michael already knew what Rivera had figured out. "I know what happened," Rivera said. "I don't know how to explain it or what it means, but I know what happened, and I think you know too." Michael didn't respond at first. The silence stretched between them, thick with implication. Then slowly, Michael nodded. "I think I do," he said. "I think I finally understand what happened, and the truth is so strange that I don't know if I can explain it in a way that makes sense." "Try. Tell me what you think happened." "Your car was towed to a private mechanic," Rivera said, laying out what he had discovered. "Russo's Auto Repair, owned by Daniel Russo's brother," Michael finished. "I didn't know that when I was alive. But somehow, now that I'm here, now that I exist in this strange space between death and life, I can feel it. I can sense connections that I couldn't feel before. I understand that this wasn't an accident. I understand that Sarah arranged it. Michael, I need you to explain to me how you're alive. I need you to explain to me why there's no body, no official death, no paramedics. I need you to explain to me what's really going on." Michael took a deep breath. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, defeated, but also strangely peaceful. He said, "I don't know. I genuinely don't know. All I know is that I died and somehow I came back. And the only explanation I have is the one that Sarah gave me. 10 years ago, she made a wish. She wished for a second chance. She wished that somehow the universe would give us both another opportunity. And somehow that wish pulled me back from death. That's not an explanation. That's supernatural nonsense. There has to be a logical explanation. Maybe there is, or maybe the universe works in ways that don't fit into logic. Either way, I'm here. I'm alive. I'm real. And I don't have answers for you because I don't have answers for myself." Rivera leaned back in his chair. In his 23 years as a detective, he learned that the truth was always stranger than fiction, and that the cases that made no sense often contained revelations that changed everything about how you understood the world. He decided to investigate one more angle. He went back to the Meridian building and pulled Sarah Morrison's financial records with a warrant. What he found was shocking. 2 days before the accident, Sarah had taken out a life insurance policy on Michael Chen for $5 million. She had listed herself as the beneficiary. The policy was activated immediately and the death benefit would be paid out upon confirmation of death. When Rivera confronted Sarah with this information, she went pale. Her green-blue eyes filled with tears and her hands began to shake. She said, "I didn't kill him. I swear to God, I didn't kill him. I took out the policy because—" She stopped and her face became a mask of anguish. "Because I wanted him to have an escape. I wanted to know that if anything happened to him, if he needed money, if he was suffering, he would at least have that. I took it out without his knowledge because I knew he'd refuse. I was trying to help him." "By taking out a life insurance policy?" Rivera said incredulously. "That's not helping. That's predatory. That's the kind of thing that looks like a motive for murder." "I know," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I know it looks insane, but you have to understand. I've been watching him for years. I have someone who keeps track of where he is, what he's doing. I knew he was struggling as an Uber driver. I knew he was barely surviving. I wanted to save him, and when I couldn't figure out how to do it openly, I did it this way. I wanted to leave him money if anything ever happened." This revelation was the final piece. Sarah Morrison had been stalking Michael Chen for 5 years, watching him, tracking him, trying to save him from a distance because she couldn't have him, and in doing so, she had created a motive. Money. $50 million potentially going to her if Michael died, which meant the accident, the collision, the death that never quite happened, all of it pointed back to Sarah. Rivera brought them back to his office and asked them a simple question. If you took out a life insurance policy on Michael, and if Michael died, then who benefited from it? Sarah and Michael exchanged glances, and something shifted in the air of the room. Some recognition passed between them. Sarah's hand moved to her neck, to the piece of jewelry that Rivera hadn't noticed before. An antique pendant, the kind that had been in families for generations, the kind that held meaning and history and weight. "Michael," Sarah said quietly, "do you remember what I told you about my wish?" "You made a wish on this pendant," Michael said, touching it gently. 10 years ago on... He paused, as if accessing a memory that didn't quite belong to him, but was becoming clearer. "Not a doorstep. Your grandmother's doorstep?" "Not a doorstep. Your doorstep," Sarah corrected. Her voice was soft, but there was something underneath it, something like resignation, like acceptance, like she was finally ready to speak truths that she had kept hidden for a decade. "And this pendant has been in my family for 4 generations. It's supposed to have power, or so my grandmother told me. She said that wishes made on this pendant, wishes made with true intention, with true love, they get answered. Not the way you expect, but they get answered." Michael's hand covered hers on the pendant. "Sarah, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I know how you came back," Sarah said, "and I think you know too. I'm saying that you didn't come back by accident. You came back because I wished for it with every fiber of my being. I wished so hard that I broke the universe to get it." Rivera watched this exchange and realized that he was witnessing something that transcended normal investigation. These two people were operating in a realm of meaning and intention that existed beyond logic, beyond evidence, beyond the normal boundaries of how the world worked. "There's one more thing," Michael said, and his voice was strange, distant, as if he was speaking from very far away. "Something I realized just now. Sarah took out the life insurance policy 2 days before the accident. But how did she know an accident was going to happen? How could she possibly have predicted that I would be hit by a car at exactly 2:30 a.m. on October 17th? The question hung in the air like a confession. Sarah's face crumbled. "Because I didn't predict it," she whispered. "Because I arranged it. Or... I think I did. I'm not even sure where my intentions end and the universe's intentions begin." There was a moment of absolute silence. Rivera felt the walls of his understanding begin to shift. This was beyond any case he'd ever worked. This was beyond the normal framework of law and investigation. "I'm going to ask you a question," Rivera said to Sarah, "and I want you to answer it honestly. When you made that wish on the pendant 10 years ago, when you were sitting on Michael's doorstep in the middle of the night, crying, what exactly were you wishing for?" Sarah closed her eyes. "I was wishing for a second chance," she said. "I was wishing that the universe would somehow give me another opportunity to be with him. I was wishing that he would come back into my life, that we would reconnect, that I would have a chance to apologize and explain and try again. And you've been wishing that every single day for 10 years. Every single day. Every morning I would touch this pendant and make the same wish. Every night I would touch it and pray that somehow, someday, it would happen." Rivera looked at Michael. "And you died. You were hit by a car at 2:30 a.m. on October 17th. A car that was driven by someone hired by the woman who had been making a wish for your resurrection for 10 years. I know how it sounds. I know it sounds like some kind of cosmic conspiracy. But I think it's something different. I think it's something more complicated. I think Sarah's wish was so powerful, so intense, so absolute that it actually shaped reality. I think the collision happened not because Sarah consciously arranged to kill me, but because her desperate desire for a second chance, her refusal to accept that we were separated forever, her absolute commitment to the idea that we should be together, I think all of that manifested in this way. That's impossible, Rivera said. I know, Michael agreed. But so is the fact that I'm sitting here talking to you. So is the fact that there's no body, no death certificate, no official record of my passing. So is the fact that I woke up in an airport terminal and became visible again when Sarah saw me. So is everything about this situation. Rivera sat in his office for hours after that, trying to make sense of what he'd heard. He had spent his 23 years believing that the world operated on logic, on cause and effect, on evidence and reason. But what he was witnessing suggested that underneath all of that, underneath the rational framework that governed human understanding, there was something else, something that responded to intention, something that could bend the rules for love. He thought about Michael and Sarah. He thought about two people separated by 10 years of regret, connected by a wish made on an antique pendant. He thought about how impossible it was and how absolutely necessary it seemed that they should be together. When arrests came, they came against Rivera's better judgment. Sarah Morrison was charged with conspiracy and attempted murder. Michael Chen was charged as an accessory, though the charges wouldn't stick because he was supposedly dead when the conspiracy occurred. Daniel Russo remained in custody. His brother would be arrested within weeks, caught through a financial trail that led directly back to Sarah. But as the case moved through the system, something extraordinary began to happen. Evidence started to disappear. The life insurance policy vanished from the records. The financial documents that showed Sarah's involvement in the arrangement with Daniel Russo's brother couldn't be located. Even the accident report itself seemed to have been retroactively erased from every database. Rivera would later learn that the evidence hadn't actually been deleted. It had simply become irretrievable, as if reality itself was revising its own records, correcting the narrative to match a different truth than the one that the forensic evidence suggested. 6 months later, Michael stood on the rooftop of the Meridian building, watching the sun set over the city. Sarah emerged from the elevator, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to him, and they stood together in silence, watching the day transform into evening. The wind was gentle, carrying with it the scent of the city, exhaust and concrete, and the strange sweetness of urban air. "I've been thinking about something," Sarah said, "about what Detective Rivera told me after we were released. He said that he'd spent his entire career solving crimes, but that this case had taught him something more valuable than any solution. He said that sometimes the greatest act of justice is accepting that some things exist beyond explanation, and that the only appropriate response is gratitude." Michael sipped his coffee. The taste was bitter and real, grounding him in this moment, in this life that he shouldn't have. "Do you ever regret it? Making that wish? Pulling me back from death? All of this would never have happened if you'd just let me go." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "No," she finally said. "Not for a second. Even knowing everything that came after, even knowing how complicated and strange and impossible it all became, no. I would make the same wish 1,000 times. I would break the universe 1,000 times to save you." Michael pulled her close. "Even though it meant arranging my death?" "I didn't arrange your death," Sarah said firmly. "I arranged a second chance. The universe turned that into a collision, but I didn't create that part. It was just how the universe decided to answer my wish. It was harsh, it was painful, but it worked." They stood together as the sun completed its descent and the city lights began to flicker on below them. From this height, the city looked like a living thing, pulsing with energy and intention. Each light represented a human being, a person with their own story, their own regrets, their own wishes cast out into the universe like prayers. "What I realized," Michael continued, "is that death isn't the end. It's not actually a full stop. It's a moment of pause, a moment where the universe recalibrates. What matters isn't whether you die or live. What matters is that you're loved. What matters is that somewhere out there, someone is sending wishes into the void. Someone is holding on to a pendant and refusing to let you go. That's what keeps you alive. That's what resurrects you. Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. So what happens now? We can't just stay frozen in this moment forever. No, Michael agreed, but we can decide what happens next. We can choose differently than we chose before. We can build something real instead of running away from something that feels impossible. Sarah pulled back and looked at him. I have a proposal, she said. I've been thinking about this for months. I want to start a foundation dedicated to helping people who've hit rock bottom, people who've lost everything the way you did. I want to take the money, all the money I've accumulated, and I want to use it to rescue people from the circumstances that almost destroyed you. Why? Michael asked. Because, Sarah said, my wish wasn't just about getting you back. It was about fixing what broke in me when I left you. It was about becoming someone worthy of the second chance the universe gave us. And I can't do that by staying silent, by staying rich and comfortable while other people suffer the way you suffered. Michael kissed her then, and in that kiss was contained all the complexity of their story, the regret and the redemption, the loss and the recovery, the death and the resurrection. The Michael Chen Foundation was established 3 months later. Sarah donated 51% of her company's shares to the foundation, ensuring that her wealth would be perpetually directed toward helping those in crisis. Michael left his job as an Uber driver and became the foundation's director of community outreach. He trained other formerly homeless individuals to become counselors to help people navigate the particular despair of having nothing and no one. Detective James Rivera became the foundation's director of security and ethical oversight. He had decided, after closing Michael's case, that the most logical response to experiencing the illogical was to dedicate himself to protecting it. He understood, in a way that most people never would, that what Michael and Sarah had experienced was real, that it mattered, and that it deserved to be preserved and honored. Within the first year, the foundation had helped over 2,000 people. Within 2 years, it had expanded to other cities. By the 5th year, it was operating in 20 major metropolitan areas across the country. The foundation's approach was simple but revolutionary. Treat the homeless and the desperate not as problems to be solved, but as human beings to be valued, to be seen, to be given a second chance. 3 years after Michael's resurrection, they were married on that same rooftop overlooking the city. The wedding was small, just family and close friends. Detective Rivera was the best man. Anna, the passenger Michael had helped on his last night as an Uber driver, served as one of Sarah's bridesmaids. The old woman had reconnected with them after reading an article about the foundation, and she had become a volunteer counselor, helping other elderly individuals navigate the particular isolation of aging. During the ceremony, as Michael and Sarah exchanged vows, something extraordinary happened. The sun, which had been obscured by clouds all morning, broke through suddenly, flooding the rooftop with golden light. And in that moment, those who were paying attention, particularly Detective Rivera, could have sworn they saw something in the light. A presence, a blessing. The universe acknowledging that this second chance was real, that this love was real, and that the impossible had been made possible through nothing more than intention, sacrifice, and the refusal to accept that death had the final word. Michael spoke his vows clearly, his voice steady and certain. I stand here today as a man who died and came back. I stand here as a man who was given a second chance, not because I deserved it, but because someone loved me so much that they bent the rules of the universe just to see me again. Sarah, you pulled me back from death. You saved me, and now I'm dedicating my life to saving others in honor of what you did for me. I promise to love you with the intensity of a man who has died. I promise to cherish every moment because I know what it means to lose everything. I promise to never take for granted what we've been given. Sarah's voice was softer, but no less intense. Michael, I spent 10 years wishing for you. 10 years making the same plea to the universe every single day. I thought I was crazy. I thought I was delusional. But it turned out I was just in love. I was just someone who refused to accept that the person I loved was gone forever. You taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wish. You taught me that intention matters. You taught me that love is real and powerful and capable of changing reality itself. I promise to never stop believing in second chances. I promise to never stop fighting for people who feel like they're at the end. I promise to honor the impossible gift we've been given by using it to save others." As they exchanged rings, a raven landed on the edge of the rooftop, a black bird with intelligent eyes perching for just a moment before flying away. Detective Rivera saw it and smiled. He'd become a believer in signs and synchronicity, in the small gestures the universe made when it wanted to communicate its approval.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.